Hello and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host, Diana Skaya. As the war in Ukraine rages on, we're seeing more complex shifts in global politics and military support. Now, recently, President Trump suggested that Ukraine should provide rare earth minerals to the U.S. in exchange for the assistance it's receiving in the conflict. Now, this does raise some important questions about resource control, international relationships, and how these decisions could reshape global supply chains. And to help us break it all down, I'm joined by Kira Rudik, Ukrainian MP from the Voice Party. Kira, so good to have you here this morning on World Talks on TVP World.
Hello, Diana, and thank you so much for having me.
All right, Kira, there is so much going on here, a lot of topics to cover, but I mean, let's start with what President Trump said. So now, he suggested that the U.S. should receive these rare earth minerals from Ukraine as part of the support that it's been giving Ukraine during the war. What do you think of this demand? I mean, how realistic is it for Ukraine to meet Trump's request, given the current state of the conflict?
Well, according to President Zelenskyy, Ukraine is happy to provide its allies with and share the development of the rare earth minerals, which Ukraine is wealthy of. However, we need to understand that more than half of those minerals are located at the temporary occupied territories, and it will be really hard to get them. And then there is a question of if this is creating a precedent for all the other democracies that they will be that they will have to give away some of their nation's wealth to get the military support. Again, right now we are in unprecedented historic events, and Ukraine is absolutely ready to discuss all the ways for us to receive the help to win the war, but there are many questions on how to actually get to the execution of it.
And there's no way that you could tell us if this would be some kind of possibility in the near future, given the fact that you did say, I mean, currently those are located in occupied territories right now.
Well, not all of the rare materials, but many of them. And so I think the fair assumption would be to say, help us to win the war, and we can promise you to have your involvement in development of all the rare materials that Ukraine controls, because we would be interested in the investment into Ukrainians' development systems. However, again, right now, when the war is raging, the question is, even if there are investment, and even if we promise something, how can we deliver that, not knowing where the Russian forces may be in a month, in a year, especially if the support from the United States will be delayed.
Kira, let me ask you this. The Polish President Andrzej Duda suggested that Ukrainian soldiers returning home could contribute to a potential rise in global crime because of the trauma that the war has inflicted upon them. What's your take on this claim? How do you think that it reflects the actual broader challenges of this post-conflict reintegration that many are talking about right now?
Diana, I really wish that the problem that President Duda was referring to would be something in our nearest future. I can assure you that when you're asking anyone in Ukraine, we would say, oh, wow, if we have a problem with the soldiers coming back to the front line, that would mean that the war is over, and now we will have to deal with really exceptional and unprecedented amount of veterans that I do not think the world has seen since the Second World War, right? And yes, there would be an issue, and we will have to find the new policies as the Ukrainian parliament, and we will have to work with our neighbors countries and with the other governments to figure out the best solution of how to provide the best support so that the return of the soldiers will be safe and will be really reassuring to all the nations. However, we are nowhere nearby this problem right now. We do not know if there will be any kind of the demobilization, and we suppose that there would not be before the end of the active phase of the war. And we do not see the end to that. And you see that the frontline situation is indeed dire and really complicated. So one thing is clear right now, that we are absolutely willing to work with our friends and allies at this situation, but we really, this is not on our urgent issues that is on the table. The urgent issue is for us all to survive, to be able to deal with this problem. Like this night, there was another attack on Kharkiv, on Kyiv, on Poltava, on other cities, which we are fighting back against, but we are still lacking air defense systems. And this is what we are worried about. Are we going to wake up the next morning, or are we going to be killed in our sleeps because of the Russian missile or drone? And so if we are working together to end the war, we will be absolutely willing to sit down and discuss the best way of dealing with more than 1 million of veterans that Ukraine will be having.
Kira,
however, we are nowhere around this issue.
Kira, let me shift gears here for a moment and take you to another interesting topic here. Now, a pro-Russian paramilitary leader from eastern Ukraine of Armenian origin, Armen Sarkisyan, he was killed on Monday when a bomb tore through parts of a luxury apartment block in Moscow. Do we know any more details about this blast, who he was, what was his contribution to the war? I mean, I have here that in December, Ukraine's SBU security service described him as a crime boss in Donetsk. What impact is his death having, or what are they talking about him in Ukraine exactly?
Well, there are a couple of simple points here. The first one is that indeed the deceased was one of the heads of the military groups in Donetsk region, and he was really supporting Russia's invasion. However, we know nothing about his the explosion that happened and him being dead. And second is, we have seen so many times the fact that Russia is killing its own allies, and the Russian regime is killing the people who are fighting for them, just to cover its tracks and to deal with it with the only way that they know, not a democratic way of the court and the sentence, but actually like the bandits do. This is something that we know that they have done with Prigozhin and many others before and after him. So I think we can be saying that people who call on for Russia to come at some point get killed, and this is obviously how the regime acts.
So you're saying that there's no way that Ukraine was involved in any of this, given the fact, I mean, like I mentioned, last December, Ukraine's security service already had a file on him. I mean, so you're saying that Ukraine was no way involved in this. There's nothing that Ukrainian authorities have even mentioned of any involvement.
I have no information about that as a parliamentarian, but I can tell you once again, Ukrainian services, they have files perhaps on all the enemies of our state who are trying to take us down, but this does not imply that we have acted on that. Our concentration right now is and was to empower our country to end the war and to win the war, and this is where the majority of the resources go.
Kira, in an interview with British journalist Piers Morgan on his talk show, Zelenskyy said that if NATO membership talks are dragged on and continue to drag on for several years, Ukraine would need protection. He asked whether Kyiv would be given sufficient missiles or nuclear weapons to counter Russia. Now, who do you think should give these weapons? How probable, again, is this request? What can you tell us on this?
Yeah, so look, Diane, for us, it's very clear and obvious. In 1994, Ukraine gave up on our second largest nuclear arsenal for the promises of protection from the countries like Russia, France, United Kingdom, and United States. The promises were that Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity will be protected. Right now, we are under attack and NATO alliance is not ready to accept Ukraine just yet. So the question is right now, so how do we expect it to protect ourselves and the countries that were promising us that for giving up their nuclear arsenal can either support us to the sufficiency so we can fight back to Russia, or provide us with the nuclear weapons so we can defend ourselves. Because if we never gave up those nuclear weapons, then Russia would never attack us, right? So this again creates many questions about the international law and about the international agreements that take place. Because right now it seems that we believed our allies, and that was not something that we were supposed to do, right? Because of where we are right now. Mm-hmm. So I think President is very clear saying, okay, well, if your promises of protecting our sovereignty and territorial integrity don't work, then return us our nuclear weapons. And if this is not happening, then what's the worth of your words and promises, right?
Thank you so much, Kira Rudik, for all your insights here on World Talks here this morning.
Thank you, and glory to Ukraine.
And that's all for this edition of World Talks here on TVP World. I'm Diana Sky, but don't go away. Up next, news with Claudia Czerwinska.